I'm Peter Curtie, Research Fellow in the Religion and Free Society programme at the Centre for Independent Studies. My guest today is the Hon Kevin Andrews, Shadow Minister for Families, Housing and Human Services, who's come to the Centre for Independent Studies today to talk about civil society and the role of government. Mr. Andrews, welcome to the Centre for Independent Studies.
It's a pleasure to be here, Peter.
Ask you, in what way do you think charities and not-for-profit organisations do contribute to civil society?
I think that charities, those voluntary organisations where people come together who address local problems, who see local challenges, are really the backbone, the skeleton, if you like, of civil society, without which a society generally wouldn't be able to operate the way in which it does in a Western democratic country like Australia.
The government has introduced a series of significant reforms to the sector, and it said that it has done so in order to boost public confidence, and that it's in order to reduce the burden on the not-for-profit sector. Do you think these reforms go too far, or do they not go far enough in strengthening that component of civil society?
The interesting thing about the reforms is that the government never made out what mischief they were meant to be addressing. It's not as if there have been reports in the media or elsewhere of major charitable organisations or even smaller charitable organisations doing things wrong, or their employees engaged in widespread fraud or anything of that nature. So our view is that this was a move which was totally unwarranted, that if there were particular issues that needed to be addressed, whether it be a taxation issue or whatever, then they should have been addressed discreetly rather than a widespread reform like this, because what we've got as a result is another bureaucracy, another level of regulation rather than less regulation on the sector, and it's not something which I think is desirable.
The Charities Commission, the new Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission, argues that in fact it's reducing the regulatory burden, but you disagree with that?
Well, it's not. I mean, here's a new bureaucracy that had employed, I think, 90 people before the legislation had even passed the Parliament, that's got a great big new building in Melbourne, and no doubt will seek to expand in the future. But it hasn't replaced any regulation at a state level. It hasn't even replaced regulation at the Commonwealth level. So if, for example, you're a school or some other body which has to report to another registering body or another body in terms of its financial statements or the like, that still remains the case. So this is not a reduction in regulation, it's actually an addition in regulation.
Can you identify the political impulse that led to this reform? You said that the mischief has never been made known. What was the impulse behind it, do you think?
Look, I think there was a sense in the charitable sector that it would be good to have some sort of key body which was seen in some way to represent the sector. But the problem here is that the new commission is meant to both represent the sector on one hand and regulate it on the other. And those two things are unlikely bedmates, and the reality is that it'll end up regulating the sector rather than representing the sector. And I think as I talk to people around the country, over time they gradually came to the realisation that their aspiration for this new commission wasn't going to be realised, and increasingly people have soured to having this as a new bureaucracy in place.
So charities and not-for-profits might become an extension of the arm of government?
That's the danger. Charitable sector, the civil society, is a separate sphere of activity within the broader society. And if government controls it, if government treats it as an agency or instrument, then, as you say, it becomes an arm of the government itself, and I don't think that's desirable. There should be some distance between government and other spheres of society, particularly the civil sector.
Our understanding of charity in Australia is, to a very great extent, shaped by a 400-year-old common law tradition. There is now a move to introduce a statutory definition of charity. Do you think that's necessary? Is it helpful?
Well, again, there hasn't been any argument put forward in any sustained way that we need to change the definition. The definition has lasted, as you said, for many centuries now. It's addressed from time to time by the courts, who have the ability under the common law to tweak it when they need to, and they've done that successfully over the years. So we don't see why there is a need to introduce a statutory definition, but there's a danger in the statutory definition as well. If you look at what's happened in the UK, where where you have a definition which is decided upon by, in the first place, the Charities Commission. We've seen attempts by that commission to actually narrow the range of activities that have traditionally or historically been regarded as charitable. So one of the heads of charity is to provide education, and yet the Charities Commission in the UK proposed that if a school didn't provide a certain number of bursaries or scholarships, then it would no longer be charitable. Now that's a narrowing of the definition of charity that is, in my view, undesirable, and that's one of the reasons why we oppose the statutory definition.
And of course there could also be a broadening of the definition in the new exposure draft, which has just been released. There is talk of allowing charities to embrace political activism, which would be quite a change from the way in which we understand charities to be functioning.
That's right. I mean, charity has, as you say, a centuries-old definition, a centuries-old notion. It was about things like the advancement of religion, the advancement of education, and the advancement of a number of other things. Now that's stood the test of time. Now to start playing around with it and to say this is something which is about political activity or the like, again, I think is confusing different spheres of activity within our society.
So coalition policy for the not-for-profit sector would be significantly different, do you think, from...
Yes, we've said that we will abolish the Charities Commission as it stands. We believe there is a place for what the sector aspired to in the first place, and that was some sort of body which would be there to help with governance standards, to raise skills within the sector, and to be some sort of focal point for it, a type of centre for excellence, if you like, for the sector. So we're prepared to support that. We would return the regulatory powers to the agencies from whence they came, namely the Tax Office, ASIC and the other organisations, and we would maintain the current common law definition of charity rather than have a statutory definition.
Kevin Andrews, thank you very much for joining us at the Centre for Independent Studies today.
My pleasure.